All right, folks, welcome to the summer meeting of the Coastal Urban Waters Research Collaborative. This will be really exciting today. I'm super thrilled to have everyone come join us virtually. The majority of our time today is really going to be spent in learning about two really cool research projects in the area. The first is um, a from the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. They received the first science RFP that we've done in relationship to MBEP's science research plan. And they're looking at responses of bacteria concentrations to storms. And this is really awesome. And it's not just in the Woonasquatucket, it's really all over that region. And both Rebecca from the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council and Dan from Codiga Hydrodynamics and Water Quality will talk to us about what they're doing and how cool and how we could try and replicate this in other places. And then next we'll have Melva Trevina Pena from URI talking about coastal access in urban areas. And she's going to kind of talk the whole gamut. So it's really connecting what's going on with this research into bacteria concentrations, storms, how folks access the urban areas, and then what happens when that access doesn't exist and they move to try and go to other areas and what happens there. Then you'll have a little bit of an update from us, but the majority of the back end, I want to hear from everybody. Tell us what's going on. And if anyone in this group needs assistance or wants to participate in some of the awesome research going on, this is what this is about, is building a network and things. So to jump right in, this group was instrumental in developing an RFP that we released earlier last fall, and we finalized it early this spring. And it was to synthesize data to describe social, economic, and/or environmental conditions in this region. And we had really great responses. We had 3 responses totaling over $150,000. We couldn't fund all of them, but it really gave us a great ideas for the future and what we were on. And the grants committee awarded it to the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council to study the response of bacteria concentrations to storm events in this entire region. And they did so because it pulled together all 3 of these data components really well and answers not only our questions as the estuary program about how all these interventions that have been going on in this area are working, but also really supports what the council is doing in trying to bring the community back into the river. And I'm going to let Rebecca and Dan go to town on that. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to allow them to share and have Rebecca and Dan take it away.
Hey, Dan.
Hi.
Did we decide you were going to share your screen or I was?
I can. You want me to do that, and then I'll take over when you pass the baton.
Okay,
Yeah,
around
let me try that.
right
I'll
before
try to share my
slide 6. Okay.
All right. Let's see. If I can share the right screen. uh, how does that look?
Do you want to maybe go into full screen mode or slideshow mode?
How about that? Yeah, let's see here.
That looks good.
That's good on my end too.
Can you see the screens at all?
Yep.
The slides?
Yep.
All right.
Everybody good?
Well,
Is this good to go?
maybe that's about as good as I'm going to get as
Yeah,
far
it
as
looks good.
the whole screen.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm pleased to be here representing WRWC and in particular representing also Alicia Lehrer, our executive director, who's been spearheading data work at WRWC for the past few decades. And my name is Rebecca Greenwald. I'm mostly called Becca, and I am the director of grants at WRWC. And it's really been a privilege getting to work with Dan and getting to know more about the CUWRC and to be a part of this process. So I'm going to just provide a little context and a little bit of information about who we are as the Watershed Council of the Woonasquatucket River, and to just, take a moment to look at the study area again with you. And then I'm going to turn this over to Dan. So this project is understanding changing bacteria response to precipitation events toward a swimmable, fishable Woonasquatucket, West, Moshassuck, and Blackstone rivers and Providence-Seekonk River region. And, these are I would say, most urban rivers in this region, which is why they are the primary focus of this study. And Dan, please correct me if I'm ever saying anything that's inaccurate. And we can go to the next slide. So, and Courtney sort of already introduced this, but I think it's a good idea to just take a little look together at the whole region of study and sort of where each of these rivers is located. And the West River is actually a tributary of the Moshassuck River. And just for kicks, I found an interesting article about the West River that, because this is also a social analysis, I thought I would share with everybody. So I'm putting that in the chat and hitting this link. And it's really a kind of telling a story about the river and an analogous social history story of community impact that I think is really important. So there's that. So just to identify, so this is, I think that what's important to note here is that this region is home to over 700,000 people, but that nearly half of these people live in underserved communities. Next slide. So the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, our mission is to create positive environmental, social, and economic change by revitalizing the Woonasquatucket River, its greenway, and its communities. And for anyone who doesn't know us, we as a Watershed Council really have a very expansive focus on the expression of meeting our mission. And so our water quality improvement work and flood mitigation work and our development of the Woonasquatucket River Greenway and its network of parks and our urban and community forestry initiatives are accompanied by programs that we have been developing, over the past 5 to 7 years that are really engaging community directly in informing and increasingly becoming drivers of our downriver work. And some of you may know some of the programs through the names of programs through which we're doing this, and which include Nuevas Voces and Campeones de Combate Climático. And what you may not know is that many of these programs have produced offshoot partnership-driven data projects that create a really amazing platform for the data that are being generated by this project to be really utilized by the community and by our organization and our many partners and the many partners involved in this work to create the pathway to real impact from this data. Next slide. So this is our watershed. We are a small, very urbanized watershed. You can see from this photo that the upper portion and lower portion of our watershed are really subject to very different conditions. It's important to note that although we're a very small watershed, in the footprint of Rhode Island, our watershed is actually home to about over 25% of Rhode Island's population. And you can see in the downriver area, I don't know, Dan, if you can just sort of circle that really overpaved downriver area down there from sort of North Providence, Johnston on down all the way through to downtown Providence and a little bit of Cranston and this area, there you go. So this is the area where our river is least swimmable and fishable. And so the communities that live here have expressed over long periods of time how meaningful it would be for them to have a water body that they can really access and utilize for high quality lives and community health. So that's the big context around this work. Next slide. And our strategic goal for our watershed, not to be repetitive, is that by 2040, we want to make all of the Woonasquatucket River clean, fishable, and swimmable and minimize flooding disasters. Part of the river actually is swimmable in the upper reaches. So this is a doable, attainable strategic goal. And we're really thrilled that Dan is going to be doing a critical piece of research that is going to help us learn more about our river and how to direct our work. Next slide. Dan, this is where I'd really like to hand it off to you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So it's important to know that the only parameter that's monitored and used to determine fishable, swimmable conditions is indicator bacteria. So that's really the focus of the project. And starting with the Woonasquatucket Council's data set, but also many other data sets, we're going to try to look at the question of, when restoration projects occur, for example, the NBC connection to the new tunnel, we're going to try to look at the before and after and see if we see a change in how much bacteria there are, and especially if that change occurs in response to storm conditions. And so I'll get into a little more detail about how we're going to use the data to try to answer that question. It involves basically taking advantage of long records, even though they're sparsely sampled, maybe once a month or every 2 weeks. Using a very long record, there's a chance that we can learn something about the response to storms. By grouping the data and looking at it relative to the most recent precipitation at that site. And so, do you want to talk about the story map, Becca?
Sure. Like one of the critical outputs that we will be producing is and adding to existing platforms that have been created largely by community residents working in partnership with our amazing academic partners. And I'm glad you gave me this opportunity, because shout out to URI and Watershed Watch for basically supporting us and to engage volunteers in collecting water quality data over decades that Dan can now use as the basis for this research. But others of our academic partners who have been working directly with our community residents include Brown University and Bates College in Maine. And and also we've been working closely with the My Coast Project. So we have many platforms to present data that will be produced, and kind of not only the data, but the kind of what the data mean, and sort of telling a data story through a story map, which is a medium we've used really well in Spanish and in English. And we have our website. We also have a website called Vecina, which you can find through our website, which is visualizing environmental and community information for neighborhood advocacy. So we're hoping to be able to utilize this data as the basis for bringing even more of the downriver residents in our watershed into this work.
Okay, great. I'll take it from here then. I just have some slides to talk about the the data analysis scientific part of the project. My name is Dan Codiga. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. And I'm doing this project through my new LLC. I'm kind of out on my own now. And I'm excited to look at Narragansett Bay again. I've studied the bay for many years, but I've looked at oxygen and chlorophyll for many years. I have not looked at bacteria yet in Narragansett Bay. So I'm excited to get into this question of untangling bacteria and how it responds to precipitation. So basically the project, the analysis part of the project I'll be doing, I think of it as 4 tasks. The first task is really focused just on bacteria. The second one is focused just on precipitation. And then the third task is to take those 2 data sets and use them together to try to understand how bacteria responds to storm events. And the last task is communicating the results. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide here in the interest of time and show you this plot I made. In planning the project, I reached out to several different organizations who are collecting bacteria across many rivers and also the upper part of Narragansett Bay. And I had a great response. Everybody was really helpful and eager to share their data and teach me about what they've learned from their data so far and help me kind of position this project to learn from them and build on what they already know. So these are the organizations here. In addition to the Woonasquatucket Council, we have the Blackstone River Collaborative, NBC, the DEM, the Shellfish Group there. We have the DOH, the Beaches Group, and the Save the Bay as well. So on this map, I tried to put locations of stations which each of these organizations have been sampling at, and I hope to get long time series of bacteria data from each of these sites. I've been corrected. It's the Blackstone River Coalition. Apologies, I should fix that. Collaborative is something slightly different. I'm learning these things. And the data sets are going to be different characters. Some sites sampled for longer, some sites sampled for shorter durations. And also, the frequency of the sampling could be monthly at some sites, maybe every 2 weeks at other sites. And so there's going to be some effort merging the data sets and putting them all together. But everybody was excited about having somebody do that. So I'm likely to focus a fair bit of energy on putting the data into kind of a single format, like perhaps one table that we can all kind of refer to and use for this project and potentially for future projects. So the first task is looking just at bacteria. I'm going to get the data sets from folks, learn about them. I'm going to integrate them together and try to uniform into a uniform format. And I'm going to do some very introductory descriptive statistics just of the bacteria data only. For example, what's the median, what are the percentiles, how do they compare to water quality thresholds? And then also I want to learn from each organization about restoration projects that have happened so that I can attempt to do before and after comparisons, because that's really the emphasis, the high level output, the outcome that we hope for the project is to learn about potential changes relative to restoration project. And so the second task is strictly focused just on precipitation. I'm going to be using a spatially explicit precipitation data set. It's called QPE, Quantitative Precipitation Estimates. And this is a radar-based product, which is what you get the spatial coverage from, but it's calibrated to rain gauges. So it's kind of a hybrid of a nice spatial data set, but anchored in ground truthing with rain gauges. And so I know a lot of analyses have been done in the past using a TF Green airport gauge, but the point of this project is to look closely at precipitation at locations far from that site, where we know that storms happen at different times and can be more intense or less intense compared to the airport. So we hope we can improve on our understanding of how the system responds. So I'll be taking this precipitation data set, and which has 4-kilometer spatial resolution and hourly temporal resolution. And I'll be using it to create a time series of precipitation at each of those bacteria sampling sites that I showed you in the previous slide. And so the data set does go back to 1996, so I can get many, many years of data. And that will be the time series of precipitation at the particular site where the bacteria was sampled will be used together with those bacteria data from that location. And at the end of this task here, I'm going to take the precipitation time series and do some analysis of events. How often do events happen? What are the statistics? How long do rainstorms typically last? What is their peak intensity and so on and so forth. So that's just precipitation data only. And this is a look at the data set a little bit. This is an example, some work I did with the data set up in the Boston metro area. In the upper left there, it shows you the coastline of the Boston metro area is the black line here. The green dots are the precipitation product grid points. So that's a 4-kilometer grid. And so I'll do a similar thing for the Providence area, the area of interest for this project. And the green arrow here pointing to this lower right panel is showing you a comparison at one particular location where there's a gauge, a rain gauge, and it's being compared to this radar-based spatially explicit product. The radar product QPE is in red, the gauge is in blue. This is about, I think, about a 2-week period here, the time series, time increasing to the right. And you can see the rainfall, events occurring sporadically, as you expect. The storm comes and maybe lasts a day or so. There are several storms during this 2-week period. And so the red and the blue are overlaying each other fairly well. And the statistics are, you can compute your statistics if you want. But just by eye, there's a fairly strong agreement. I think it will be strong enough to do the kind of analysis that we're planning on. And then this third task is where the fun begins to try to put these two data sets together. And so the challenge here will be aligning the bacteria. Every single individual sample for bacteria has a date and timestamp. We're going to align that relative to the most recent precipitation event at that particular location. And by doing that, it allows you to create what I call a composite plot. And you can then superpose all the data over many years on a single plot. And you'll be, hopefully the goal here is to see a pattern for how the precipitation rises at the end of a storm and then tapers off with time after the storm ends. And so what that composite plot looks like is this. This is a very schematic kind of how I hope the data looks. In reality, it's probably going to be a lot messier and a lot more challenging, but this is the goal. The concept is that you can take all the bacteria samples from many, many years. These are the red dots, and superpose them on this one plot. They're registered in the X direction. They're registered to 0, which is the number of days since the end of the most recent precipitation event. And so the sampling over many years is, of course, random relative to storms. Some of the samples are right at the end of a storm. Some are maybe a week or two after a storm. And so that coverage in the X direction on this plot should be fairly good, depending on how many years of data that you have. And so the hope is that it's fairly good, and the hope is that you get a pattern, kind of like this schematic. We may be lucky in certain places to have enough data to succeed with that approach, and in other places, I'm almost certain we will not have enough data. So it's going to be interesting to learn about the different data sets and which ones are kind of strong enough to succeed with this kind of an approach. And so I think I'll just move on to my last slide here, which is communicating results. So I hope it's a 1-year project, and about 3/4 of the way through it, I hope to be having a workshop and inviting everyone to come and look at what we've got so far, what we've learned so far. And then I'd like to learn, how people feel about the results and what their suggestions are before tidying it up, and then writing a report and helping Becca and the folks at the Watershed Council put together the story map, just kind of providing the data and helping them do that in a way that kind of reflects what the data, what story can be told with the data. So that's the kind of the fourth chunk of effort for the project. I think I'm going to end there because I know we were targeting having a few minutes to field questions.
Nah, I think you guys are good. And so, yeah, this is a time for anyone to have questions or comments or thoughts about this work. We're at the ground floor, so if you have anything or suggestions for Dan or Becca, I think this would be a great time to include them. Yeah, Eliza.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Dan. Hi, Becca.
Hi.
So I know NBC's data are, we have the hours of each, like sample time, including the sample date. If you have hours and timestamps for all the other data, could you do hours since last storm instead of days?
Definitely. I'm planning to use whatever the finest resolution we can get. I guess I didn't make that clear. Yeah, the plot, I mean, I'm expecting the schematic plot here. I'm expecting that to that fall off, that tapering off of bacteria as they decay and they're flushed out of the system. I think that occurs over, typically it occur over like a day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe different locations, different durations. But I'm hoping we can have hourly data. The precipitation data set is hourly, and so I'm hoping to do it on an hourly basis as much as I can.
Joe.
Thanks. Dan, I'm just curious. I'm just looking at your plot here. Is this going to kind of aggregate the various storm sizes all into one, or are you kind of breaking it down by, kind of tiers, if you will, of storm sizes? Because the reason why I ask is I would kind of fully expect, drastic differences between smaller storms that would be entirely captured by the tunnel versus larger storms that may only be partially captured.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this is like a schematic here, just one schematic of a composite plot. So just to kind of get the point across of what this type of plot is, I've just been thinking in terms of lumping all the data together. But you're right. This kind of plot could be done only for storms above a certain amount of precipitation, or only for storms that had a duration longer than a certain amount, and so on and so forth. So the data can be subdivided and kind of sliced and diced in that way easily. And I think that's probably going to be necessary. The starting point, I think, will just show all the data at once and see how far we can get. I'm a little concerned that we won't have that much data, sufficient data really at certain points, at certain locations anyway. We won't have sufficient data. Once we break it out between the before and the after of the restoration projects, that's already reducing the amount that you can use. And so breaking it out further between large storms and small storms is going to reduce the number of data. And so there's going to be a limit to how far we can go with that. But yeah, your point is well taken.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that real quick, if I could make a suggestion, you may want to look at kind of the less than half inch in a 24-hour period storm versus the greater than, because we kind of use that as the threshold on when we'll need to close some of the Providence River shell fishing areas. So my thought is probably a half inch might be a good starting point just to see if the plot looks different compared to all data.
That is excellent advice. And I look forward to, actually, one of the things I'm hoping to get from David Borkman, who's helping on this, the shell fishing group, but also all the other data providers. I'm hoping to get reports and previous analyses so I can understand what has been done with the data in the past and then kind of use that as a jumping off point. So ways to classify different storms, like you're suggesting here, that's super helpful. I really appreciate it.
Dan, before we go to the next person with their hand raised, there's a question in the chat from Lola.
Okay.
Yeah, so Lola asks, she would like to know how you're going to include the watershed precipitation data from this study area with the data that are coming from the gauge at the airport. So what sounds like to me is you mentioned the fact that the airport is not indicative of what's going on in Providence. So how are you getting the precipitation data that is local to the area?
Yeah, so great question. So I'm going to be using a radar-based data set, which is independent from the gauge. And that data set has coverage across the entire area at 4-kilometer resolution. So there's a grid, and each grid point is 4 kilometers apart from the others. So I'm going to, as part of the precipitation analysis, I'm going to compare the gridded product at the location of TF green to the gauge collected data at TF green. So it's like a direct head-to-head comparison to as a way of assessing how much confidence we can have in this radar product. because at the more distant locations, we'll be using just the radar product, and we want to know how much we can trust it. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but hopefully there's two different data sets: directly collected rain gauges, which are very sparse and few and far between, and they're not really sufficient to allow a complete analysis at all the different bacteria sampling sites. And the second type is a radar-based data, which has good spatial coverage. And I've chosen a radar data set which has been calibrated against rain gauges. So I'm optimistic it will be able to do what we're hoping to do in this project. I've used it up in the Boston metro area for similar analysis.
Yeah. So is this radar kind of like what you would see on the news or something if you're watching rainfall?
Yes, it's
Okay.
exactly the same product. It's when you watch the news, the weather forecaster has that moving map behind them, or you look at your app on your phone, you see the spatial pattern of precipitation. It's exactly the same product, but it's better in the sense that it has been reanalyzed. It's not a real-time product. It's been reanalyzed over many past years in order to ensure that it's corrected to match the available gauge data. So it's a gauge-corrected radar product. So it kind of has the strengths of being calibrated to gauges, but also having really good spatial coverage.
Wow. Super cool. I'm going to definitely let Dave ask his question. He's been waiting so patiently.
Thank you so much, Dan and Rebecca. The work is great. I'm a charter captain actually in Rhode Island and a recreational shell fisherman. I'm also a fishing writer, and I constantly hear commercial and recreational shell fishermen in particular, and I'm glad DEM's on this call, concerned about bacteria in the bay and wondering how this work might inform the opening and closing of conditional areas in the bay. And I know that might not be the privy of the study, but I'm just looking a little bit ahead when the study releases and how it's communicated. And then, of course, we've heard this cry from the commercial community for quite some time now that there's not enough bacteria in the bay to grow quahogs, so on and so forth. So it's a very sensitive issue. So I was just curious as to how this, and maybe this is not a good question for you, Dan, maybe it's a good question for DEM folks on the call, how this might inform the opening and closing of the bay and other work that's being done in regard to bacteria and quahog health and growth.
Okay, great questions. I see Joe is still on. Do you want to start, Joe, or should I take a step?
Sure, I can, they are good questions. I can I think, address both of them relatively quickly. As far as the kind of concerns from the commercial shell fishing industry, it's not that there's not enough bacteria in the bay. It's not enough nitrogen or nutrients in the bay. I don't think anybody's really debating that they want to increase bacteria levels. So I think that's kind of a separate issue there, kind of apples and oranges. As far as how it will impact, decisions to open and close shell fishing areas. It's not going to directly impact it, but what I can tell you is every year, Dave Borkman and his team in the shell fishing program in my office, every year, kind of April timeframe, they evaluate the data that they have for bacteria results and precipitation, and they do evaluate if we can, make changes to when conditional shell fishing areas open. And in fact, over the past 3 years, we have made a handful of changes. Some of them are shorter durations of closures. Other ones are reopening areas or making areas that were prohibited into conditional areas. So although this may not directly impact that, we have a separate program that they do that every year. They evaluate, again, bacteria and precipitation data to see if it warrants changes to when we open and close shell fishing areas. But, and I don't want to hijack the meeting. I certainly would be more than willing to have a longer discussion offline if you have any further questions, but thanks.
Great. Thank you, Joe and Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
All right. any, any last minute questions before we switch? No. Okay, I'll leave it with Casey's thought that she dropped in the chat, and it's that how these data may reflect improvements of water quality after these restoration projects, and think through connecting them to more coastal resilience efforts. And I think that's exactly the long-term imagination we all had when we thought about this project, was how could we use these data that everyone is collecting all the time and really show that these efforts are working? How do we show that greening the greenway is actually improving the water quality? And that, I think the lessons we learned in that frame could definitely be applied to other places in the region and the state. So with that, I am going to ask Melva to come up and Dan to stop sharing. And Dan
I'll
is
stop
dropped.
sharing. If you have any further questions, this is my email. I'd love to hear
Yes.
suggestions and input. It'd be great. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
He's also open for work. So if you have any need. So yeah, I'll ask Melva to come up and share her stuff.
I am just gonna share my screen.
Perfect. So while Melva's doing that, give a little, Melva and I have been interacting a lot on this coastal access issue, and I have loved hearing about all the work she's done in the Providence area and how much fun she seems to have doing this work and all the people she meets. So I'm gonna let her take it away and yeah, go for it. I'm super excited to hear.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. So today I feel like I packed a lot into this talk, so I hope I can get through it all. I know there's gonna be a lot of stuff that I'm not gonna be able to get to, that has been in my mind and it's in conversations I have with people. So if you want to chat more about this, feel free to reach out. And yeah, thanks again for having me here. So today I'll talk a little bit about me. I see some familiar names on the call, so it's exciting to see some of you here. So some of you already do know me, a lot of people don't. So I'll talk a little bit about me and the research I've done in Rhode Island, because there's various projects that I'm going to draw from to have these conversations about coastal fishing access in urban areas and beyond, and more general in Rhode Island. I'll talk a little bit about the uneven distribution of coastal access in Rhode Island, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this, but also then what this means for people who are trying to fish in Rhode Island, some of the key takeaways, and some of the thoughts I have for beginning to address some of the challenges that I'm going to point out today, and then I'll leave some room for questions and discussion. So a little bit about me. I'm a human geographer and an ethnographer. I do qualitative research. I do a lot of field work. I highlighted some photos from last year, just like two very extreme places that I went to, one being mangrove communities in Peru, and the other one I went to Washington, D.C. with Azul, which is an ocean justice organization. I joined their leadership program, and I got to go to Capitol Hill and meet senators and state representatives, and Seth Magaziner was very gracious in meeting with us. He was awesome to chat with in the halls of Capitol Hill. So I wanted to add that photo here just to kind of show you the range of work that I do. I am also on the Marine Fisheries Council, so I am learning a lot through that and bring a lot of interest and perspective into that. So it kind of gives you a range of the work I've been doing. And here I highlighted my research interests, and just to kind of summarize it, all the work I do aims to be community engaged, at least community centered. And it really is about environmental and ocean justice and equity. And a lot of what I'll be talking about today is going to be about these types of topics represented here. So in a snapshot, to really summarize all the work that I've done in Rhode Island, it's really focused on coastal access, but specifically coastal fishing access. It really condenses down to, I've talked to a lot of coastal users, but especially shore fishers, because these are people who need to be in a space for a long period of time. And I'm really interested in understanding their experiences and accessing those spaces. The goals of my work is advocacy. I want to find ways to increase and improve coastal fishing access for people. In general, coastal access, but fishing comes with a lot of that. I'm really interested in raising the visibility of underrepresented and underserved groups in Rhode Island. And in particular, I've worked a lot with immigrant and refugee communities, so people belonging to what I talk about, call marginalized, ethnicized, and racialized communities. I'll just say MER today when I refer to those communities. And really, my goal is to identify pathways for increased engagement and participation. So I really appreciate opportunities to be in spaces such as this one, because I feel like from a lot of these conversations, we collectively start to think about how to collaborate and increase these pathways, identify these pathways. So another reason why I've been really focused on this work is we are the third most diverse state in New England, and the Latinx community is the fastest growing demographic group in the state. But there's been a few more efforts in recent years to include these communities in regional and state coastal and marine studies, but there still seems to be we were still behind on that. There's still a lot of underrepresentation and misunderstanding of how these communities engage on the coast, what they do at the coast, and what their needs are, and how they are or not represented in policy and decision-making spaces. This underrepresentation is a problem because people's positionality and their intersecting identities inform their experiences in nature. And when we don't have an understanding of some groups, we may end up making decisions that have unintended consequences on these groups. It could lead to critical management gaps that affect the communities, but also the ecosystems that we all care about here in Rhode Island. So I'm going to highlight some of the projects that, again, I'm drawing insight from a lot of this work, not from one specific one, but I started doing this work in 2019, very exploratory research with 2 undergraduate students, where we began to just intercept people at the coast. I highlight a lot of pictures that you can see, like a lot of this work has historically been field-based. In 2021, I expanded it a bit more and worked with a lot more students. I think we had a team of 4 different students that year, where we were able to reach 200 coastal users. And this was not focused on fishing. It was just coastal access experiences and perceptions of environmental quality at the coast. It was during COVID, so then we followed up with some of these participants through phone interviews. In 2022, I hired a grad student to work on, we focused on coastal fishing and seafood systems, better understanding the contributions of recreational fishing to local seafood networks. So we did a lot more ethnographic work for that one with in-depth interviews and spending a lot of time at the shore and more in fewer spaces. As you all know, we have a big coastline, so can't visit too many sites. But anyway, so that was in 2022. And in 2023, I switched it up by spending a lot of time at the centers of 2 community-based organizations that we worked with on this project, where we were really focusing on coastal fishing access and barriers that communities are facing, in particular urban Providence communities. And we worked with the Refugee Dream Center and the Center for Southeast Asians, where we conducted 8 focus groups with 51 participants. In 2024, I joined a really big project where we're looking at alternative urban food provisioning networks, and we're part of one of 3 case studies. We have Rhode Island, Baltimore, and DC, where we're all looking at how people, people's practices to provision food, whether it be from gardening or fishing or foraging. I'm leading the fisheries component. And in the case of Rhode Island, we conducted interviews along the shore. This is one example of my student conducting an interview with a fisher. And right now, I'm currently working on a project that is a little bit different than the work I've been doing, where it's focused still on coastal access, but we're specifically assessing the effectiveness of the Rhode Island Shoreline Access Law and in the context of climate change. And we conducted 18 interviews so far with key informants that we are calling ocean access advocates. And we're actually conducting focus groups this summer. So if anybody here is interested in participating, please reach out. We would love to have you. That's going to be happening next month. And I have a collaborator here on the line, Yvonne Wingard is our student graduate research assistant, working with us on this project. So happy to see her here. So this is not something that's new to all of you, but I wanted to kind of mention this so that you can understand where I'm going with the work. everybody knows we have a very large coastline for how small our land area is in Rhode Island. And we do have over 300 public coastal access points. You know, the numbers are increasing. Maybe it's actually a little bit less than 300, but for sure we do have, at least as of 2025, 225 designated rights of ways that provide public access to the shoreline. And then we have more than 20 municipal and state parks and beaches that also provide the public access to the coast. But access to the shore is very unevenly distributed in Rhode Island. Those of you who live here know this. I just, again, wanted to highlight this because these numbers to me are really telling a big story. So I looked at the public access points in urban coastal municipalities, and all of the ones found within Providence County, so Providence, East Providence, Pawtucket, and Cranston, we have 24 coastal access points in that whole county, versus, for example, in just the city of Warwick, there's 39, and in Newport, which is a much smaller area, there's 30. So this is just looking at coastal urban access. And there's also been some research done in Rhode Island looking at how there's unequal access to clean waters. All of you probably know that water quality is lower in Upper Narragansett Bay than it is in the lower areas of the bay. But there's a really awesome study by Twitchell et al. Who looked at this, and we know that it's not just that the cleaner water is in the southern parts of the bay, but they're actually, the public access points are concentrated farther than the bay as well. So what they found is that residents from urbanized and densely populated areas have to travel farther to get to cleaner waters. Rebecca was mentioning earlier, and I know this is a conversation I've had with folks at WWC. It's a big problem that there are not many spaces where people can access clean waters. When you have a car, you hop in your car and you drive 40, 50 minutes, an hour and a half with traffic. I don't know. You get to a really awesome place. But when people don't have a car, what are they doing? So those are the questions that we need to be thinking more about. But in the study, basically what they were able to find that low income and people belonging to what I'm calling again MER communities disproportionately bear the burden because they're spending more time and money to access higher quality coastal fishing sites than residents of predominantly white communities. So just to highlight two different contrasts here of we have in Providence and Rhode Island, we have a diversity index of 49.4. Most of this diversity is in Providence County, where you see the diversity index reaching 60.3. Versus, for example, Washington County has the lowest diversity index of all of them at 21.1. And we see this dynamic where, again, people that don't have access to clean waters in Providence County are coming down to the beaches and public access points found, for example, Washington County and other parts of the southern parts of the bay. So that was a really simplified version of what this paper covered. So I'm sure a lot of you have read it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I think Kay Mulvaney's on the call, but it's an awesome paper where you can really see how they are able to come up with these conclusions and why it's important that we think about intersectionality when it comes to access of the coast. So what does this mean for people who are attempting to find places to go fishing? So the first thing that I want to point out from all the work that I've done is that I have learned that there's very diverse coastal access experiences amongst the public, and in particular among MER communities. They're not a monolith. There's very wide-ranging experiences. There are people who have a lot of knowledge of how to access the coast, and there are people that I have met that have been in Rhode Island for 5 to 6 years. A woman in particular had been here 6 years, and she had only been to the coast one time. So there are people that really don't know how to begin to access coastal access. So this is just, I'm going to show you some quotes of the interviews that I've done, but this was when the translator was explaining to us that there was this person sitting there. When he arrived to Rhode Island, he really wanted to explore the coast. He wanted to understand the new place that this was a refugee. This is where they are deciding to settle, and they wanted to explore more of this area. And they said that until that moment in that focus group, they had not even heard of how they could even begin to go fishing or at the shore. So there's just a lack of information all around and how to navigate coastal access. So obviously, we also know that there's a lot of lack of public infrastructure. Parking is an issue that we all have to deal with. And for those of us who have cars, we don't think about public transportation, but that's another barrier that people are very aware about. So this person was talking about, going clamming or fishing and just having a really challenging time finding parking. But again, this is something that we can all relate to. It is really challenging. There's not a lot of parking areas along the shore. But also, people talked about when they do get there, they often find themselves in unwelcoming places, either facing like extreme localism. Again, I think a lot of us can relate to that. But there's also a lot of racism and classism that people experience, and like these feelings and messaging of not belonging there. So in this example, this person was saying that they were exploring a new area, and they had parked, and this person, a resident, came by, and they hassled them to leave, and they were asking, what are you doing here? And this person just wanted to kind of explore, and they were like, you can mind your own business and go about your day, like telling this person, you're not allowed to be here. So these are a lot of stories I've heard of people being explicitly and implicitly told they don't belong there. And this matters because beyond recreation, which is very important, fishing provides people with a wealth of benefits. So here I've just highlighted some of them. For example, a source of identity and belonging to a community. I used to think that fishing provided people a sense of belonging to Rhode Island, especially amongst immigrant communities. Like, this is a new place that they now belong here. But what I actually have found is that more of the sense of belonging is to belonging to back home, or to a culture and a people that they left behind. This just is a short quote highlighting how this person was talking about when they eat fish. They see their country, like it reminds them of back home. And this is something that I've heard a lot from people, like how being able to fish, being able to eat the fish that they find in Rhode Island waters connects them to the culture and the families that they left somewhere else. I've also learned that it's a very rich multi-generational cultural practice. And this picture here, I found some women clamming in Jamestown. These are two generations, but what's not pictured here is the little girl who was the fourth generation, and the great grandma of the little girl who was not clamming because she was so old, but she was still sitting there. They had a little umbrella, and she was just sitting on a chair observing everybody clamming. So 4 generations of women were out there clamming together. So this is very much something that people have been practicing for many generations before coming to Rhode Island. And now they're in Rhode Island, they continue those practices. As someone said, this is just part of life growing up. This person was explaining growing up as a kid, remembering in like the 80s and 90s, and how there was a huge Cambodian community. There still is, but especially when they started to arrive in the 80s and 90s, these refugees communities, they remember going with big families out to fish, and then just have all these memories of sharing that fish within the families, and just having cookouts, and everybody just having, this being a part of their new life in Rhode Island. I heard that from current people who just recently arrived as well, current refugees. And then again, there's just so much more that I could go on, but just to highlight some of these quotes, there's this opportunity that fishing provides, connecting and building relationships with community and as well with the environment, but also people, fishing is a plus. Like, they do want to catch the fish, but beyond the fish and eating that fish, there's all these other components that are very important to them. I've also learned that fishing is rooted in practices of care. So people see food sharing, or seafood sharing, I should say, as an expression of care, whether it be gifting fish or bartering fish or cooking a meal with the fish that you caught and gifting it to somebody. And there's a lot of solidarity and reciprocity embedded within these these transactions. There's also, so here's somebody's talking about fishing being about togetherness. So again, it's all connected to the previous slide as well. But this idea that, when you catch this big fish, you're able to call everybody, come to your house, you cook it together, and it becomes a big community event. And the people just talked about how that was a really important aspect of fishing for them, which goes beyond the water. It goes back home with them. And there's a lot of mutual aid happening again through food sharing, but there's also a lot of information sharing that is really important and allows people to even be able to access fishing. So someone was talking about how there's changing regulations, and how years ago there was no license that you needed, but now you need a license, and how for some people, like in this case, they're talking about their grandfather and their dad, it'd be really hard for them to navigate these new changing regulations. So again, people share knowledge with each other, they share information, and this is how they are able to care for each other and ensure that people have access to coastal fishing. Some of the issues that they talked about was that a lot of times the information is available in English and Spanish. I've even seen signs on the coast in Portuguese, but they talked about there's not a lot of information in Southeast Asian languages. So those are some of the barriers, again, that are limiting how people are able to engage in these practices. And lastly, just to highlight something that I found really beautiful is that they also talked about how they earn their karma through fishing. In this context, this person was sharing that they gift a lot of the fish to the elders and the people at the temple, and the monks are able to feed others with the fish that they're catching, and they felt very proud of being able to contribute to the community in that way. So some of the work that the findings that I have found through the years is that there are very knowledgeable fishers in these communities that are very aware about fishing regulations, but they don't really know a lot about any fish consumption advisories that are out there. This information is readily available. You Google it, in 30 seconds, you come to a fact sheet showing this figure right here. And I wanted to highlight some of the fish that people talk a lot about that they are specifically targeting: scup and flounder, tautog, and you can see striped bass and bluefish, which are at the bottom of seafood to avoid. So the information, again, is out there, but it doesn't make it out to them. So it might be that not only are they eating fish that may be contaminated or potentially increasing their risk, but it's also that people don't know what a serving size looks like and how many times a week they should be eating it. So I'm not saying that people should be afraid of eating any of the fish. I'm just saying that there needs to be some more thought and care into the fish that people are consuming, and oftentimes they don't even know that they should be doing that. People talk about fish being really healthy and really trusting the quality of the fish that they're catching. So here this quote is highlighting how somebody was saying that they don't trust the store-bought fish because they don't know what that fish has been fed, but the fish that they catch that is wild, that they're catching themselves or someone they know is gifting to them, is healthy, so they trust it, and they're not thinking about, what type of fish it is. They're just thinking about where the fish is coming from, and they trust that it's good fish. So another thing that I've also learned is that if people can't see the problem, if they don't see the pollution in front of them, that they don't think about the potential harm that could come from contaminated waters. And here this quote is just highlighting how this person's thinking about trash, and when they see trash in a place, they start to wonder if they should be fishing there. But there's a lot of contaminants and pollutants, as you all know, that are not visible to the naked eye and would pose risk, or enhances the risk of being adversely affected down the line. And here's just this example of at India Point Park. I'm sure many of you have been here before. I took this picture a few years ago, and there's several groups fishing. There's children fishing. It looks really fun. And then to my right, I took this picture where it shows, the sewage discharge output. And I mean, maybe that day, maybe had been days since there'd been some discharge coming through. But the point here is that there are people who would not ever go fishing at a place like this because they're aware of what this means. And there are people who don't really know what this means, and they're fishing in places that could potentially be contaminated. So again, going back to some of these barriers and what it means for coastal fishing access when you don't have water quality of water quality issues, is that people will travel further distances. Again, it's been documented in several papers, especially that Twitchell et al. Paper, where people will drive further distances because they're aware. Someone here was saying that they know that they're not going to eat fish that is coming from canals or near the city. But as you saw in the previous photo, there are people who are catching fish from these waters and eating it and feeding it to their children. So there are people who do know about these issues, and they choose to go to these other places. Another issue that also then comes with having to travel these distances is that people end up in places that they're not too familiar with, communities that, again, they're being explicitly or implicitly told they don't belong. In this case, they were talking about how they find themselves in places where the neighbors nearby, the residents, are complaining about the loud music or whatnot, and they have been told that they can't go fishing there anymore. And they just kind of talked about a lot of the conversation about just feeling constantly like they're surveilled, that they're being policed, that they're being harassed, being asked about their licenses, and constantly being questioned about their presence there. So these are things that people just have to deal with. But again, to close some of these topics, what I also found really beautiful is that there are networks of people that care for each other and they're sharing information. And one of the ways in which they do this is they talked about people having their scouts within the community who are willing to put themselves at risk, go to these locations, learn whether they're going to be safe or not, if they're good areas or not, and they report that information back to the community so that people know which places they can go to and which places they should be avoiding. So there are these barriers that exist, but people navigate them and through community are able to overcome them. So to wrap it up, because I do want to have a couple of minutes for questions, coastal access should be considered as a food access issue in Rhode Island because there are thousands of people who go to the coast to fish for food. But beyond, again, recreation and food access, it's also a source of social infrastructure. As I've mentioned, there's a lot of community networks that are developed at the coast, people developing friendships and developing relationships that go beyond fishing, that provides, strengthens communities beyond fishing. But in general, there's a need to really understand that there's a wide range of coastal users out there, and we need to incorporate them into our decision making. There's a lot of multi-generational knowledge that these communities have that we are not necessarily super aware of or taking into consideration. And again, sometimes when we're not aware of what communities are doing or what their needs are or what their issues and barriers may be to access, then maybe we make decisions that have unintended harm on them. So to address some of the challenges, again, we are doing a lot. I know that there's a lot of people on this call who are very aware of these issues and doing work to improve access. I do think we need to do more as a state, though. Again, we need to really understand these experiences of people and really think about how to incorporate them into decision making and policy. And we need to think about, there's a lot of information out there, great work being done, but information does not make it to these communities. So we need to be more thoughtful and strategic about the outreach and engagement approaches that we're taking so that this information is making it to people. I'm not saying people, again, shouldn't be eating this fish. I'm not saying that because suddenly they have access to information, they're going to not eat the fish, but at least they can make informed decisions because the information is making it to them. But what's really important is that we also need to be thinking about improving cross-cultural and multilingual communication both ways, understanding and communication both ways, and I'll expand on that in a little bit. And the biggest issue that I see within the work that I've been doing is that we need to really focus on fishing as a food source rather than just a recreational activity, because when we start managing it as a food source, we're going to be focused more on some of these health aspects and really making sure that people are making informed decisions. So understanding of cultural differences, for example, in some communities, cleaning your fish on site is very common. It's a totally normal practice. Nobody thinks twice about it. However, for some of us, maybe you go to a site and you see a bunch of fish scales and you're going to say, these people are polluting and dirtying up the place. So there's a miscommunication there, and we need to be able to have understanding of like, okay, if this is not how people should be engaging, how do we share that information with them? But also maybe being understanding that these people bring different cultural practices and engagement at these sites, and it's going to be kind of like, how do we have these conversations? And I wanted to highlight these photos because my friend, who's a professor at University of New Hampshire, sent me these photos from her field site in Southern California. She's not doing fisheries work. She just happened to be walking by and sent me these photos. And I really love that in these sites, there's not only cleaning stations, but that there was signage that tells people, hey, if you catch these fish, you should think twice about consuming it. That's not something I've necessarily seen in Rhode Island. There's a lot of coastal access points in Rhode Island that I have not visited because I do not have time to go through the hundreds of them. But I do have these two examples that when I've been seeing improvements, as I would call them, and Rocky Point is one of them where we see fish cleaning stations, and I've also seen some in Jamestown. I'm sure there's many others, but these are ways in which being thoughtful about the design of these places and what we're putting in these amenities are creating more inclusive and better opportunities for people to be the fishers to be in these spaces. So we need to meet people where they're at. For me, yes, in the field, but I also learned that meeting them at community organization centers was incredible because I was able to benefit from the established relationships that they already have, the organizations have with the communities. And we were able to unpack issues that people were not comfortable sharing with us ever in the field, but they opened up about in these spaces. So that was a really, again, I think we have to be just more strategic in how we reach people and how we access information so that we can, be better informed as researchers and as decision makers and managers. So just to leave it here, I think, we do need to be more thoughtful about like what conversations are being included, what topics are here and what topics are not. Who is being included, who are we prioritizing and whose needs are we overlooking and why? And then also thinking about how are we engaging with people? Sometimes we bring them in and they're just kind of like a check mark and they're not meaningfully engaged, but we need to be really thinking about like how do we center these in community needs and how do we use this information to make decisions that can lead to better outcomes for them and improve their well-being. In this case, increase their coastal access. So with that, I'll leave you, have a couple minutes for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, thoughts, you want to just chat about this, here's my email, and we can continue the conversation over Zoom or something some other time.
All right. Thank you, Melva. Any questions from anyone or thoughts? I will say, Melva, Marielle, our GIS guru, put in the chat that as part of our coastal access, public access, there's like looking at fish cleaning stations or these things. So we could add that and be able to share that information with you later. But also, as we're doing this stuff, if there's something else that we could add to the list of saying, hey, when you're out looking at these places, check this box if you see this, that would help the communities you're working with. I think we can definitely handle that as well.
Yeah. That's awesome about documenting that information. Amenities like that. Yeah.
All right, Dave.
Melva, I love your work. It is so
thank you.
It is so targeted. And the thing that we all know around this table, around the Zoom call, is that as we start to experience climate impacts, the urban fisherman is going to be impacted most. With only 9 locations, or however many there were in Providence County, when you take into account what's happening to habitat, sea level rise, warming water, this is going to impact the urban area much more because folks don't have the ability, as you say, to jump in a car to go to South County to go fishing. So I love your work, and I'll reach out to you on the side because I'd like to learn more about it. And I think that you're hooked up with Scott Travis of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers, but I'd really like to introduce you to because I think there could be some connection there.
No, I used to know Greg Vespi, but I don't know Scott. So yeah, thank you so much.
Scott's the new guy. Yep.
All right, Lola, you have your hand raised.
Hi, Melva. You mentioned something that caught my attention in terms of how sometimes the fishermen that are in the coast can be maybe no welcome in the places. And I ask myself this question sometimes because I like to go and walk the coast here where I am in Newport. And I'm asking myself if you also ask them in some of the surveys that you are doing, what perception they have that they have leaving behind. Because for some people, cultural practice are different than others. And then one of the things that happen is that in many places where they are fishing, sometimes they leave garbage behind. And I don't know if that trust, that will be one of the things that if people see, they don't like that behavior, and then they don't feel they don't feel that the fishers are welcome in some places, So because there are populations that, I mean, they leave things and they don't realize, or because there are no infrastructure, there is no places where you put the trash in place in natural spaces. And that is a problem, I think. And
Yeah.
you
Oh, go ahead.
talking about that. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really good point that there are people who have historically engaged in certain ways that clashes with the established Rhode Island ways, if we want to say that. And that creates tension, right? So I do think that that's why this outreach and engagement needs to be really key and thinking about like making sure that people understand that those practices that maybe they had behind from another country, like you don't leave trash behind here, just because there's no trash can doesn't mean you leave it behind. I mean, I would certainly say that that is a point of tension. There's also a lot of other points of tensions that, make people not want certain groups of people coming into an area. But I think that's a really good point. I think it goes both ways, not saying, hey, leaving trash behind is okay, let's accept it. I am not saying that. Absolutely not. But I do think that we need to be more engaged with communities that are utilizing these spaces so we understand why they're leaving that trash behind, and then talking to them about what the other alternative options are and educating them on like why we are not leaving that trash behind and what it means for the ecosystem, for example, like how it pollutes and at the end of the day it harms you back. And anyway, there's more we can chat about that. And there's another paper, one of the big study we did with 200 people, 200 participants that was focused on that. And there's a lot of insights I have from that I could share with you.
Yeah.
When we chat in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a question of education. Thank you.
All right, Rebecca.
So, hi, Melba.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. So, yeah. So, we're an urban river and a network of urban rivers where a lot of people like to fish. And in where people are fishing in the Woonasquatucket, it really isn't safe to eat any of the fish at all. And I'm just wondering, in your work with the organizations that are located in the urban centers, if you encountered widespread knowledge that it is not safe to eat the fish from, and I'm not sure about the Blackstone. I know parts of the Blackstone you shouldn't eat the fish, but I know which parts of the Woonasquatucket you really can't eat the fish. But we don't know. We have signs everywhere. We do education in schools. We have material that we distribute all the time about not eating the fish, but people are fishing and we don't know if they're eating the fish. So I was wondering if you had any.
Yeah, definitely this is not like it's been like added on to my projects. It is something that I would like to explore and really thinking about like why do people make choices like that? In the literature, in the academic literature, there has been a lot of work on this. And what I have found is that a lot of times people they eat fish and they don't throw up after they eat it. So they're
Right.
like, this is safe. And they eat it again and they eat it again and again and again. And they're not getting sick because the impacts come down the line after years of consuming this, contaminated fish. So I think that's part of it, that they don't really believe that it's really bad fish because they're not getting sick. That's what a lot of like other studies and other places have done. I have met people who have told me they go shellfishing in areas that they know to be close and they still go shellfishing and they're very aware and they're like, oh, I've done it. So I think again, the signs, putting signs there, like in the case of California, that's a start. I think that's a start to at least begin to plant seeds and getting people to kind of question themselves and their behaviors. But I do think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to really explain what the long-term implications of this is, so that people can then make those decisions. I still think that there's going to be people who are going to fish eat the fish that they're consuming from these places. But I think at the end of the day, at least the information should be, you know this well, Becca, like it needs to be sent in a way that they're going to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very plain language.
Yes.
I do want to say there was one sign in your slides that I really didn't even understand what the slide was. I mean, what the sign was saying. It's sort of it designated it as an area, but it didn't say what that meant. So I didn't know what the sign was saying, even in English. I don't know if you,
Is it the regulations one?
I think
the
so.
fish.
It was like a
Yeah.
something, this area is, but it didn't say what that actually meant to me being there. Like I didn't know how to interpret what I was looking at. And the language that was used wasn't something that I understood in my, everyday language
Yeah.
lexicon. So yeah.
Thank you. I think
Yeah.
I definitely ran out of time.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Uh, any other questions? All right. So now, I would love to ask anybody. I'm actually going to thank our three speakers. This was super informative and great. And I'm excited to see how we can link all of this and to see what, Melva's work is going to come to with a lot of this new information. So with that, thank you, thank you. I am going to stop the recording.